So today we're going to do another actually good meta tier list, and the reason these are actually good meta tier lists is because we are going to take into consideration the fact that different changes to different agents can impact other agents as well. For instance, we are going to get chamber nerfs. That's pretty much been confirmed at this point, and so obviously agents that perform better against chamber or worse against chamber will change as well. So this is kind of a bit of a prediction of the future for particularly the chamber changes, but since I last did this, we've also had KO and Phoenix changes as well. So, you know, I do want to redo this and kind of reestablish where we are at this point in time. Now, for those of you who missed any of the chamber changes, here they are. So this is for the rendezvous. Its base cooldown is up to 30 seconds, same for the recall, and it's 45 if the anchor is destroyed. And the radius size, this is kind of a big one for the rendezvous, has gone from 21 to 15 meters. This one could have a big impact on certain maps, but maybe not as big of a deal for others, and will, you know, potentially limit where you can put it, which with the destruction of a rendezvous putting up to 45 seconds as well, could be somewhat impactful depending on where you have to put this to get to a certain angle. The trademark slow duration has gone to 6 seconds. The tour de force is now an 8 cost ult, and the slow duration is also 6 seconds when you get a kill with it. And the headhunter bullet cost increased from 100 to 150 as well. That also could be a pretty big nerf. So with those chamber changes in mind, and obviously the changes to KO and Phoenix that are already live, there is also a Neon change we'll talk about when we get to Neon as well. Let's talk about where these different agents are in the meta, and we'll start with Astra. So let's start with Astra, and I'm going to put Astra in the B tier. The reason Astra is going in the B tier is because I think she's actually a little underrated. Obviously, she's not picked very highly in terms of ranked play, but in higher level play in particular, if you look at the win rates of pro teams, Astra is still doing very well compared to Omen overall. It's about 50-50. She still seems completely acceptable, and if you know how to play Astra, then you can still definitely get a lot of value from her. Now let's come to Brim, and Brim I think is a pretty solid B tier agent. He's kind of good on his maps, but not as good on the ones that you wouldn't call his maps in particular. You know, he's fairly basic to use, although Marv might disagree, as you can see from the clip. But yeah, good on bind, good on fracture, you know, not as good everywhere else, but still probably playable on most maps, maybe not Breeze. But other than that, you know, a fairly solid agent overall. Now let's come to Omen, and I do think that Omen, considering, you know, some of his pick rates and whatnot, is maybe slightly overrated by the pro scene overall, but I think Omen is still solid. I'm still going to put him in the B tier here as well, alongside the other two controllers. You know, you can still definitely get good value from him. I think he is being punished slightly by Split being removed, because I think Split was one of Omen's better maps with all the one-ways you could do. So with the introduction of Pearl, we'll have to see how that goes, but I do think that, you know, Omen is still a solid agent for sure, and you can still find good value from him. And then let's come to Viper, and again I'm going to surprise here a bit because I am going to put Viper into the S tier. Now this does not mean that I think that Viper needs a nerf, but I do think we need an agent, and I do hope that the next agent does have a wall smoke, because this is a big thing of why Viper is so present in the meta, because obviously that wall smoke is just so unique, and you need it for certain maps like obviously Icebox and Breeze. But now with the introduction of Pearl as well, and kind of the early game of what we've seen there, I think Viper is also essential on that map as well, and a lot of teams will be picking Viper on Pearl, and you probably should as well. And so that's 3 maps where she's absolutely essential. We've seen on Bind where, you know, a lot of teams are going back to Viper on Bind as well, after Fnatic kind of showed some things that you could do with Viper on that map. So we're seeing a ton of Viper on Bind as well. We're even seeing some Viper on Fracture. So if you're getting consistently picked on 5 out of 7 maps, and you're like an auto lock on 3, yeah, you're going to be really strong. And it's not because it's necessarily Viper's strength, but it's her uniqueness with that wall smoke that, you know, really is kind of setting her apart from the rest of the controllers. And now let's come to Breach, and I'm going to put Breach in the C tier, which I think might surprise some people, but let me explain why this is, okay? Because I think, again, with the removal of Split and the addition of Pearl, you have to remember that Split is one of Breach's better maps, and I don't think that Pearl will be necessarily a bad map for Breach, but I don't think it'll be as good as Split was. And then we're already seeing as well, and I would be shocked if teams didn't start doing this, but the best 2 Fracture teams in the world are FPX and DRX right now, and neither of them play Breach on Fracture. So that was kind of his home map, but the best 2 teams, or at least the best 2 looking teams on that map, don't play Breach. So I think a lot of people might switching away from Breach again right there, and so then you're ending up with Breach like, yeah, sure, maybe you'll pick him on Haven, but that might be it. And when you only have one map that you're really seeing consistent play on, you know, it's kind of difficult to say you're anything else other than C tier. And now let's come to Fade, and this one's fairly easy, and I'm sure most of you probably agree. Fade is going straight into S tier. Really, I would say on Breeze, Fade isn't really an optimal pick, but on every other map, I think you can make a decent argument that Fade is an optimal pick right now. And maybe she is like in that kind of nerf-worthy range. She's like on the edge, I think, where if you were going to nerf her, it doesn't need to be anything big, just maybe like small little things. But she definitely is very strong. She is benefiting from the chamber meta, I think, as well, because of course finding where that chamber is, what angle that chamber is playing, where that operator is as well, you know, is a big part of the meta right now. And obviously with the 2 Prowlers and the Haunt, Fade is very good at doing that. So, you know, that is kind of benefiting Fade a bit, but I still think she will be very strong even if Chamber fell off the map. And now let's come to KO. And KO, I might surprise some of you here again, but I'm going to put him in S tier. Low S tier, but let me explain why. So, one team that picks a lot of KO is FPX. And FPX won Masters Copenhagen, and so they might know what they're doing. But here's the thing. KO might be the only agent outside of Chamber that you can play on every single map. Including Pearl, I think, as well. I think KO is just either a very solid pick on every map or just a must pick on every map. You know, Ascent, obviously a must pick. Bind is like one where we've seen FBX play KO on Bind and find success with. Breeze, obviously kind of normal to pick KO there. Fracture as well, we've seen quite a bit of KO. Haven is one where we've seen some KO. Might be his weakest map overall, but still is usable on that map for sure. Icebox, I expect KO to be very meta on Icebox with the nade changes going through the walls. I think that will just make KO even better on that map. And then Pearl as well, I think you can get decent value from KO there as well. So yeah, KO is just, if you can play an agent on every single map and get good value from them, then that agent is pretty good. Moving on to Skye, and I'm still going to put Skye in A tier here. I still think she's pretty good overall. Obviously, she has definitely a home map in Bind, but also maps like Breeze and Haven that you can definitely still play her on as well. And I think, again, on Pearl, it could be a Skye map. I'm not as confident about that, but I still think Skye is a pretty decent option overall. And Sova will be joining Skye in the A tier. Now, I know that Sova's pick rate has seen a bit of a decrease ever since the introduction of Fade, because they are fulfilling a bit of a similar role, and I do think Fade is better than Sova, so that does explain it, but I still think that Sova, the agent himself, is perfectly fine, and I still think is a very solid agent overall. He's still very strong, in my opinion, and his win rates are still pretty good overall as well, so I don't think that Sova should be dipping too far below the A tier. And now let's come to Jett, and I might surprise some of you here. I'm going to put Jett in the top of the C tier. The reason I'm going to put Jett in the top of the C tier is because, again, she really only has one map where I know she's the best option, which is Breeze, and on every other map, I think she isn't the best option, or it's very questionable if she is. Ascent would be kind of the big question mark there, but again, I don't think that Jett is the best option on Ascent in my own opinion, because I think no Duelist Triple Initiator is the better option overall. And we've seen even a lot of pro players struggle with Jett, and really she'd be lower down in the C tier if it weren't for the Chamber nerfs, because obviously she is somewhat competing with Chamber for that kind of operator role in general. But we've seen even a lot of pros where they activate the dash, it runs out, and then they just don't have a dash, and they used it way too early, and they weren't being aggressive and peeking with the dash either. We've seen a lot of pro players struggle with it overall. Now let's come to Neon, and as a part of kind of the new changes that will be coming in, Neon's ult is going to be dealing a lot more damage than it was before if you hit the head, which for high skill players is going to be an absolutely massive buff. I cannot tell you how big of a buff that is going to be. It is going to be insane, particularly at the highest levels, but even at lower levels where the Neon ult was already pretty good, you know, it's probably going to be even better. So Neon got a pretty sizable, significant buff in my opinion, and so I'm going to put Neon in the low A tier because of that, because her ult was kind of always, I think, the one thing dragging her down, well, now that it's not dragging her down, and now it's a plus in my opinion, and really a big threat potentially as well, I think that Neon could be a big meta changer with that change overall, and we could see a lot more Neon than we currently are. Now let's come to Phoenix, and unfortunately we still haven't seen a lot of the new Phoenix in pro play, but we have seen some of it, and what we've seen hasn't been too great. So Phoenix, unfortunately, I'm still going to put in the D tier. I don't think those changes were enough to really get Phoenix out of the D tier, unfortunately. And now let's come to Raze, and Raze I'm going to put at the top of the A tier. She's been doing pretty well this whole meta. Obviously, I think the combination with Fade is really helping Raze out overall. But even now, I think she's in a spot where, you know, she has like Bind, which is like an absolute must pick Raze, right? But then looking at the rest of the maps, it's kind of like, you kind of can pick Raze on all of them, maybe outside of Breeze. But I don't think you have to, right? And that's why I'm putting her in A tier and not S tier, because I think on a lot of these maps, like Icebox, Pearl, Haven, Fracture. You know, you could pick Raze on those maps, and I think you'll find value from Raze on those maps. But I don't think you have to, and I think there might be slightly better options as well, whether it's Neon or whether it's, you know, playing no Duelist on quite a few of those maps as well. Rayna obviously is still going to have the same problem that she always did. She's going to be, you know, pretty good in ranked and not that good at the highest levels. This will be based more on the highest levels of the game, so I will put Rayna overall in the D tier. And now let's come to Yoru, everyone's favorite agent, but where will I put him? I will be putting him at the bottom of C tier. The reason he's going in the C tier is because I have obviously made a recent video about the problems Yoru can have sometimes and that it becomes a bit predictable. But I did just see a very good game from Angry Titans where the Yoru actually looked really, really good. And so that kind of made me think, yeah, okay, I'll put Yoru in the C tier because I do think you can find, you know, a decent amount of value from him. And so he deserves to be in the C tier. Now let's come to Chamber. And this one obviously is a big one because where will the new Chamber nerfs, assuming that they do come in, which I'm pretty sure they will, now let's come to Chamber, and assuming that the nerfs that, you know, were announced for Chamber do come in probably next week, where shall we put Chamber? Well, I unfortunately still think that he will be in the S tier. My hope is that maybe he'll be low S tier and maybe not the tippity top of S tier, but that's where I'll put him right now. The thing is, of course, the main kind of thing for Chamber, that initial teleport away where he gets most of his strength from, is still there, right? They've touched kind of everything else, but not that. It very much is reminiscent of the jet dash, right? Where they didn't want to nerf the jet dash for the longest time. Eventually, they bit the bullet and decided to nerf the jet dash, and I wouldn't be shocked if the same thing ends up coming true for Chamber as well, where they really don't want to nerf this kind of central point of the character, but eventually they have to because he's just been lasting in the meta for too long and is just still too strong. The initial ability just is too strong, and I worry that that still might be the case, though I do think, you know, he will be in the S tier and not in like an SS plus tier or whatever that potentially he was before. And now let's come to Cypher, and Cypher unfortunately is going into the D tier now. This is mainly due to the rotation of Split. I think if Split was still in the pool, he would be in C tier because then he would have a map that I could categorically say was a Cypher map, even outperforming Chamber, you know, time and time again on that map of Split, but unfortunately it's rotating out, and so Cypher definitely, I think, does need a buff at this point, especially with the rotation of Split. Pearl might be an okay Cypher map overall, but I doubt it's going to be as good as Split was for Cypher, so unfortunately Cypher does go into the D tier. And now let's come to Killjoy, and Killjoy is an interesting one where I think with the nerf to Chamber, Killjoy could benefit somewhat, right? Getting picked more on Ascent, maybe gets picked a bit more on maps like Haven as well, and maybe she can start finding some strongholds. So I'm going to put Killjoy in low B tier for that reason, because I think with the nerf to Chamber, you know, hopefully she can find some value there. And now let's come to Sage, and I'm going to put Sage at the top of B tier. The reason is the rotation of Split is obviously a bit of a hindrance for Sage. Obviously, that was a very good Sage map, but she still has Icebox, and we've seen recently on both Ascent and Fracture, Sage seeing quite a lot of play and quite a lot of success as well. So I think that Sage is definitely in a solid place right now, and you can find success with Sage on quite a few different maps. And so there is the meta tier list overall. I think this is a pretty decent reflection of where the meta is right now on the whole, and not just looking necessarily at pick rates, but also at the win rates of certain agents as well, and where agents are doing well or not. And so with the changes, I mean, the big question mark will be Chamber, of course, but with the changes, I do expect that this will, you know, pretty much be kind of where the meta is at.